Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. You may have caught my review of the new Breaching of the Great Bastion Arcane Journal on the weekend, and I also waved this box around, and today it's time to look at the contents and get painting.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
Just before I get down to the painting, I thought I would show you what the box is like before you start assembling the miniatures. I know some people are interested. This is a reinforcement set, and these kits are going to be available individually once this set has sold out. Hopefully it's not sold out too quickly. But you've got your new peasants, which can be built with spears or with bows, your Iron Hail gunners and your crane gunners, and your Astromancer's foot and mounted as well. Full colour instructions. I had no problems following any of the instructions in this booklet, and I haven't done for most colour instruction booklets, to be fair, that Games Workshop do. No problems with any of the kits either. For those of you that have watched my channel and many other channels will know that the Sentinel was a little bit tricky to build at times. The foot Miao Ying was a little bit tricky with the cape. The instructions weren't spot on, but these were great. There's essentially one frame type for the gunners, all squeezed on. You can see how much is squeezed on there. And then when it comes to the peasants, you've got a sort of a bodies frame, and then you've got a weapons frame as well. So it's pretty simple. There's not too many different frames in those boxes. They're absolutely rammed full of bits, so they've spent a lot of time engineering them to make sure that they all squeeze on. Really didn't have any problems though finding the bits beyond what you normally do, searching for the odd number here or there. Mold lines are very, very manageable. Not too many at all. There are some, of course, there always are with Games Workshop miniatures, or most plastic miniatures these days, but again, nothing that I felt was excessive at all, and they were a bit of a dream to go together, to be honest with you. I always worry when you start building these kits that they're going to be tricky and a little bit hard to put together. I just didn't have any issues. The only thing I'll ever say, these are new kits. They're not like the ones of old where you can't clip off all of the bodies and all of the heads and all of the arms and then expect to be able to put them together. You do really have to kind of build them one by one. There are duplicates obviously in the set, so you can kind of build them in pairs or something like that to speed up a little bit. But aside from that, very much a modern Games Workshop kit, and I think they're great. The Astromancers actually have a couple of options that you can build with different heads, and you obviously interchangeable between the rider and the foot version anyway, but there are options within that as well, which is always cool. They're only very subtle, but you do have a little bit of an option to make them look slightly different. The little Croman Familiar is really cool. He only builds the one way, but I wasn't really expecting anything else. Again, these are really cool miniatures. I'm sure they're going to be available as a separate box very, very soon. So I generally prime my miniatures black, and I did in this instance, and I'm starting off with a zenithal layer through my airbrush, and I usually start with a very light coat first, so light that it almost looks like the miniature's grey, loads of the black still showing through in all of those recesses, and then I build up the intensity from a top down angle but all the way around, so it's not a single light source, but it gives you a really nice feeling of light. And that's because I like to use lots of contrast or speed paint, those kind of quick style paints, to do my base layers, and in places I don't need to do anything else because I've provided a really good quality underpaint. So the preparation is important to me. I know not everyone's going to be able to do this. If you don't have an airbrush, a grey prime and a white dry brush can go quite a long way to get a similar effect. So I definitely would try it out if you like to follow any of the methods in the rest of this video. And while I've not showed it on camera here, I do give the miniatures a little dry brush afterwards in white. Very subtle, very light, but it really picks out all that detail, which really enhances that underpaint. For the next stage, I'm still using the airbrush, and I'm actually using a thin skeleton horde, applying it over the whole miniature bit in really, really light thin layers. So all of that underpainting shows through. I really toyed with the idea was starting with some deep browns and working up through lighter creams with my airbrush, almost doing a coloured zenithal in that way. Those of you who have seen my painting tutorials for the recent Marauders, I did something very similar there, but here I wanted it to be extra clean and extra light in order to cover the other colours that I'm going to apply onto the miniature afterwards. So I thought, with this being a lot of the main colour of my army, I really wanted to sort of have a nice thin coat, and I thought this would be the best way of doing it. And it just shows that you can airbrush these kind of paints onto miniatures over a zenithal and still keep all of that underpainting, still keep all of that shadow, all of those highlights, because the paint you're applying is so thin and you've got a nice even coat. Now it's time for some more dry brushing. I've got a dry palette, a soft, roundish, bristled dry brush, the modern style, and I've got a bonish colour and a white colour. I will forget to call out some paint names here, so you can always pause the video if you want to make a note of them, and I'll also put them all up as a full paint list, including pictures of the paint bottles, on my Patreon, and that post is available to free patrons as well, so you don't actually have to pay anything to get the paint list for this video, so it'll be there if you don't want to write it all down now. But the method here is to make sure this is a high quality dry brush, and what I mean by that is that I've got very little paint on my brush each time, so I'm leaving no horrible dry streaky marks on any of the flat surfaces. I don't want it to look too chalky. I really want to very subtly enhance all the detail on the miniature, keeping that nice skeleton horde layer underneath, so much so that it barely looks that I've done the dry brushing at all in places. The reason for using two colours and following up with the white afterwards, that's really focused towards the top areas of some of the miniatures, catching the top of the feathers and areas like that, just to really lift it, which will help enhance the next layers of paint that I do. So I'm returning now to that skeleton horde that I put through the airbrush to start with, and I'm using a little bit of speed paint thinner in a rubber palette here, and what I'm doing now is giving the thinnest of glazes over the top of where I've just dry brushed, and it feels like I'm repeating myself, but I'm reinforcing some of the shadows and smoothing some of the areas out. I really don't need to add an awful lot of paint here, so I'm very gently glazing it on in places, but anywhere where the dry brush is a little bit too bright or white, this really tones it down and adds a little bit more into the shadows, and I think it really makes it worth it. The goal is this off-white colour will be about 50% of the colour I put down on some of the troops, and maybe 80% on the others, especially the peasants. I'm trying to cut down the time it would take to paint whole units. And I'm only painting one of each type at the moment for this video, but when I go back and I have to paint more, and you can see I'm adding red here now, I don't want it to take forever, so I'm changing the scheme a little bit from what you see on the box art. I'm saving the pure red jackets for the gunpowder weapon guys. I thought the peasants can have more of this lovely skeleton horde off-white, more basic kind of cloth. I felt that fitted with a less professional soldier, so instead I'm using it for the trim here, and I'll add some blue in around the sash. I've still got the same spot colours that I have in my army, which is very similar to the studio paint job, but I'm also decreasing the amount of brush painting I'm having to do and the amount of time it will take to paint the whole army, while hopefully still really leaving a nice effect. You can see here when I get onto the gunner models, I am painting in that red in the areas of those coats, just the same as it is with the studio army, and it's really striking. But the paint job that I've used already as an underpaint is perfect for the contrast to go over. So this is Thalasar blue. It's a beautiful vibrant blue from the Citadel contrast range. Absolutely love it because it really doesn't want to sit on the raised surfaces. It really runs into that detail, which I think makes it really strong, especially when the pigment is still really strong for such a light blue. So it runs into those recesses and you get this really smooth transition from the shadowed areas to the light, and painting it there onto this lovely sort of sash around his waist in those high sort of wrinkled areas. It looks like you don't need to do anything else. I am going to come back and do some highlighting, but if you really want to save time, good underpainting like this, all the dry brushing going in, yes, it's kind of deluxe version of slap chop, so to speak, but it really works, really saves you time. And if you are going to come back and highlight like I am, you can maybe do a little bit less highlighting, or at least shows you where you need to highlight. This is Grim Black. I'm using this for the boots and then lots of the leather areas on some of the miniatures. So the leather belts and the leather pouches on the more professional soldiers, the gunpowder troops. I'm going to use a brown for the peasants. And I'm painting 5 miniatures at the same time here. So I am swapping between the different types, which may make it a little bit harder to follow. But I wanted to make sure that in this one video, and it's going to be a big one, so strap in, but in this one video I can show you how all of the normal troops are there, and I'll save the Astromancer for a separate video, probably coming a few days after this one. I like to work by colour where I can, so where I've got some of that black in my palette, I've decided, well, a couple of them can have black hair, and I use it while it's there. It's a way of breaking down the processes for me, making sure that I'm using up paint that's on the palette, and it just sort of takes time to work by colour sometimes rather than just by area of a miniature. And now I am moving into those browns, and this is Cygor Brown, a colour I love and use so often. I'm going to be using it for a lot of things on these miniatures. So the rifle stocks, the gun stocks are going to be painted in this brown that's going to be wood, but we've also got little bottles and pouches with their powder horns, those kind of things. I'll also be using the same brown. And then when I move on in a little while onto the sandals and the straps on the peasants, I'll also be using this brown as well. And it doesn't matter because I'm going to be using different types of highlighting on them, different colours. So as the base, this brown can work for many different outcomes. So I can go for more of a reddish highlight for the powder horns, and then I can change the brown slightly, maybe for the rifle stocks or something like that. So again, I'm saving time, I'm thinking ahead into army painting and how many different colours that I want to use, just to try and simplify it a little bit, especially with modern day Games Workshop miniatures when there's so much detail on them. As beautiful as they are, trying to break down the number of colours used sometimes can be hard. And even when I feel like I have done, sometimes I look at all the paints I've used at the end of a project, especially now I'm taking pictures of them to put on my Patreon, I realise, wow, that's a lot of different paints. So this is just one of those areas where for this base colour, everything brown is going to be base coated in this Cygor Brown. This is Bony Matter. It's got more of a brownish tone to this bone colour than the Skeleton Horde from Citadel, which is more of a yellow ochre kind of colour. So I'm just using it so it's different really from the Skeleton Horde that I've already used. It's this nice base colour for all of the little bits of rope. I say all the little bits of rope. The peasants have got this rope strapping around, at least on this sculpt. And then this is Agaresh Dunes, which is a sort of a brownish yellow. What I feel on the spectrum, it would be one up from Skeleton Horde, a little bit more intense with its colour. If you remove some pigment or thinned it, it might even be a little bit like Skeleton Horde. And I thought this would be perfect to use for this bamboo hat, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. And with all that dry brushing and airbrushing I've already done on the miniature, one neat coat of this and it looks absolutely fantastic. I do come back and give a little dry brush afterwards, but it looks pretty good just because I've made sure that the pooling wasn't on those flat areas. And again, rather than using lots of different colours, I've decided to make the bows and the arrow shafts for the bowmen in this colour as well. So it's like a light wood rather than the darker wood that I've used for the spears. The peasants have got what looks like a hunk of meat. It's probably cured meat, but I've painted it as a slightly fresher cut. I'm just using a couple of fleshish tones here from the Army Painter range. There's so many different ways that you can paint this. You could paint it as cooked meat, obviously. And while I don't show it in the video, I do use a little bit of Blood for the Blood God, very thinly glazed, just over the wet end, shall we call it, but it really is up to you whether you want to make it super fresh or cooked, but it's a lovely little addition to the miniature. So back to the Bony Matter and some Ghillie Dew here. Now I've stuck these shields on. Many people will leave them off to paint. I like to think that if it's not too hard to paint when it's stuck on, if I'm painting an old army, again I want to do it this way. And if you've watched my wood painting recipes, this has got a nod to that. There's a little bit of wood grain on the inside of the shield. It's barely seen once it's all painted together, so I'm just glazing a little bit of green and a bit of Bony Matter together, letting them run together into that wood grain. And by the time the rest of the details are on there, that's enough to suggest just some wood grain, some wood colour on the back side of the shield. This is pure red from Warpainter Fanatic. I really love it. It's got a real striking colour to it. I didn't use this when I originally painted the first lot of Cathay, so if you've watched that video and seen how I've painted the crew to the cannon and to the rocket, I've used different reds to highlight. The base red, the Blood Angels red is the same, but I've used different reds to highlight, and I found that this was bright enough. And again, with that really good quality underpaint with the dry brushing, it's really picked up the higher edges of the fabric, so they're already showing through from that glaze layer of the Blood Angels red. So I'm just kind of following along, just following those top edges of the detail where it looks the brightest with the pure red, and that's enough to give it a really nice highlight. When it comes to the shield with the airbrush, I deliberately focused the white towards the bottom of it so it was darker at the top. So I'm just blending out the mid-tone here a little bit here with that same red, and then wet blending it towards the edge just to make it a little bit smoother. It's probably not needed by the time I've added the other detail in and some weathering, which you'll see later on in the video, but at this stage I just wanted to smooth it out slightly. I think this shot here really highlights, pun intended, how easy it is to go in to something that's been underpainted with a contrast paint and then just follow up and enforce that top highlight with a nice bright colour that matches, in this case the red, and really make it pop and stand out. Again, refer to that previous video. I used the two blues in my right hand there. I'm just replacing that with one colour from the Fanatic range, and it makes very little difference at all. I think I was playing around with a mix of the other two, working my way up with a double highlight, and I found that this colour is slightly more vibrant, and a single highlight, at least on these miniatures with these very small areas of blue, there's much less blue, this was perfect just really to run along the edge here and give it a bit of an edge highlight, which is already showing, as I've already mentioned, from the underpainting that I've done. So it didn't take too long at all just to run the brush round and really make it pop and stand out that little bit more. With the bone and tan areas, I'm starting with this Skeleton Legion here, thinned on my wet palette. All of these paints are on my wet palette, by the way, unless it's a contrast paint. And I'm just reinforcing in the same way as I did all the others, reinforcing those top highlights, trying to do very little painting in any of the other areas, hence all that underpainting and all that time with the airbrush beforehand. So by just reinforcing the highlights that are on the miniature where that contrast has gone into the recesses and you've got those lighter areas at the top, I'm just tidying it up and making it pop. And this first highlight can be a little bit thicker as I work my way around all of those tan areas, all the tops of all those folds on the clothing, be that the trousers, be that the sort of the skirts, or the neck rolls and ties and the straps on their boots as well. I'm trying to keep as much of that tan as possible on the folds there at the front of the spearman. Just again trying to keep the paint thin so there's not really super noticeable brush marks, or where they are there, they're neat, or neat as I can make them. Then going in this case with Ancient Stone, it's a slightly lighter bone colour, a little bit more white. If you don't have two different bone colours, you can just add a little bit of white to the mix, and just adding a slightly thinner line to all of those highlight areas, maybe not following on the whole length of a line, maybe just to the most exposed areas. And it just gives you that extra stage of highlight, really makes it pop and adds that extra look of quality, and it doesn't look like you've just painted your miniature with contrast paint at all. I think it just really makes it pop and stand out, and it's a light enough bone colour there. When I had the paint and the palette, like I quite often do, I just highlighted the end of the bone that's sticking out of that hunk of meat on his back. But all in all, just going around, tidying it up, making it pop, and trying not to make those highlights too heavy, focusing them to the edges more, to the bottom areas if it's a large area of cloth, and just trying to make it sort of look a little bit smarter and a bit neater. So this is boar hide. It's quite a reddish brown, and it works really nicely with the Seigel brown. And you may remember a little bit earlier in the video when I was doing the base layers of Seigel brown, I said there were going to be two paths afterwards for the same brown base colour, just to give it different looks, and this is one of those. This is the start of the reddish leather area, so I'm saving that for the little bottles and pouches, the powder horns, and some of the sort of the leather areas on their clothing. And when we get to the peasants as well, I'll be using this on their little leather sandals and the strapping that goes up round their calves as well. And the next stage is Fur Cloak, which is actually part of one of the Tooth and Coach triads that works with the previous colour. Again, standard layering highlighting here, so I'm working on those top areas now. Try not to make them too stark. There's only a few areas of brown leather. I don't need to add too much detail to them here, just enough color variation to make it look like you've painted that area of the miniature nicely. Keep it fairly neat, and these colors work quite well together. For the other path, I have something slightly cooler, still fairly warm brown, but not quite as red, and I'm saving that for the wooden areas. So we're talking here the haft of this long spear, but also for the stocks on all of the guns. I was going to say rifle, it's definitely not a rifle, it's more of a blunderbuss. And it's painting in just a normal first layer highlight, keeping that darker brown in. So we'll come back with a further highlight afterwards, but I'm not sort of trying to break any ground here. This is a standard layering highlighting, building up as neatly as I can. For that next highlight, I've just added a little bit of this Skeleton Legion to that oak brown just to lighten it slightly, and that's more than enough for a subtle highlight on the wood. You could go in and paint in all the wood grain on these. It would look very, very cool. Again, there's an awful lot of it on the miniatures, and it might take you a long time to do it. However, what I've done, I can always return to a later date should I choose to. Again, just a few other quick highlights at the moment. I grabbed a grey there just to highlight the hair on a couple of the miniatures, and then just a single highlight over all of the black leather areas that I've done. Again, the black paint that I used as a base already has gone into the recesses and has lighter areas, so I'm just focusing on the lighter areas that the contrast paint, or speed paint in this case, have left. So I'm just reinforcing those, and that's more than enough of a highlight, especially on the boots. By the time I've added some weathering powders at the basing stage, they get messed up anyway. Just using a little bit of ambush yellow here, which is almost a yellowy bone colour. It's a nice little highlight for the Angarash dunes. So the lightest of touches here for a little bit of a dry brush on the top of that bamboo hat, and that's all you need. I don't want to add any streaks to it. It looked pretty good as it was. A little bit of a dry brush on the side of the arrows in the quiver, and then a little bit on the bow as well. I decided to focus on the extreme ends of the bow, leaving it a little bit darker towards the hand, just to give it a little bit of colour variation. This is dark red Army Painter speed paint. I was left with one miniature with a hair colour I hadn't chosen. I didn't want to go for a lighter hair colour, but I wanted to go for something that would go nicely into the recesses that wouldn't really require any highlights. If you've got a nice zenithal, like I keep banging on about, you can get away with it for hair if you want to, especially on a gaming unit like this, and it works quite well for that colour. I didn't do anything other than a nice even coat over the top. These are the skin tones that I've chosen. 3 are from an extendable triad set from Army Painter War Paints, and 1 is from one of the John Blanche Masterclass set 3, which is the ash root, and it's actually advertised as something you can work with this skin set, and it does work very, very well, but more on that in a different video probably. But I'm just using the ash root first as a base colour over all the skin areas, and I'm going to continue to layer upwards to the top highlight. I've thinned the paint, actually using a little bit of a speed paint medium on my wet palette, and they thin very nicely with that. I'm just layering up, making sure that they are nice thin layers, that I'm still showing each coat underneath, otherwise it's pointless. You could go in with a standard skin tone and wash. I prefer to layer up in most cases, not always, but in most cases, and I felt that it worked quite well in this instance. One thing I do like to do after the base layer of skin, or at very least after the second tone, is to do the eyes before I do my top 2 highlights. That way, if I do mess up an eye, I've not got to fix all of the skin paint that I have done again. But there's 5 miniatures here. I'm not going to go into detail about how I painted the skin, other than to say that I've layered it up, and it gives quite a nice effect. Obviously, with layering, you're adding a little bit less paint each time, focusing more and more where the light would hit on those areas, and when you get to the final stages like this, you're painting little dots on knuckles, or it's a dot on the bridge of the nose or top of the eye or the top of the cheekbone, that kind of thing. At this stage, I wasn't happy that the rope was standing out enough from the rest of the tan clothing, so I've gone back in with a little bit of white and just given that little extra highlight just to make it pop and stand out. I needed to get the white out anyway, because as you can see here, I had all of the feathers to paint on the arrows as well. Now it's time to do the metallics with pretty much everything else done, and There's a bit more metallic than I thought there was going to be on the miniatures, or at least appears just by looking at them. The peasants, to be fair, there is not a huge amount, just the arrow heads, a little bit of trim on the arrow quivers, of course the end of the spears, or the weird looking half moon spear in this instance. There's other little patches as well, but not an awful lot. You'll notice that I started with a dark bronze. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know why, because I bang on about it all the time. One of my preferred methods of painting metal is to start with a really dark brownish kind of metallic colour, just to really give the colour some depth. Two things it does. First of all, that it provides the darkish shadows for nice goldish colours or copper colours, and then also it works really nice for steel colours as well, because it just gives them extra depth and makes them look a little bit more realistic in my mind. It's just something I prefer to do, because there's lots of gold and steel colours on these. If you're following along the studio style paint scheme with lots of gold trim, which I want to do, this is just a perfect colour that I can put on every metallic area on all of the miniatures, and then I know I can go and start layering up the other colours, be that steel or be that gold. For the next stage, I'm using a really nice dark silver as well. I find it helps to go dark for the next stage. I'm using some Pro Acrylic paints here, really nice colours, and they work really nicely over the nice brown base here I've got here as well. So I'm trying to leave a little bit of that brown showing in most cases deliberately for the reasons that I've already said. So I'm working my way around the miniatures. Most of the metal is on your crane gunners and your iron hail gunners, be that on the shield rims. Some of them have a little bit of armour, very much like the Jade Warriors as well, or even on the barrel of the long gun there, just in the areas that doesn't have all the gold wrappings around it as well. There's lots of sort of showy off detail here, but they're wearing armour, they've got metal helmets, they've got shoulder pads on, shoulder guards and things as well. One of the peasants does have a shoulder armour on there. They are painted, I think, as leather, or at least leather coloured by the studio paint scheme. I decided, partly for simplicity, but also to add a little bit of difference in colour, to paint it as steel. Been playing around with the true metallic metal sets from Vallejo recently. This is the standard one and the highlight version, and it's just a nice bright steel and a really nice highlight option. So I'm using these just to, again, standard layering, highlighting, building up from light to dark. And there's no washes involved yet at all in any of these miniatures. I will do something with the metals in a minute, but not a standard wash. But again, it just layering up those highlights and leaving a little bit of the darker colours showing and building up towards where the light catches, and it really starts to make it look shiny and have some depth and some real variation to the metallic. Back to Pro Acrylic here, we have rich gold and bright gold. I'm trying to keep it relatively simple here, working over that bronze colour, that dark bronze colour, starting with the rich gold and then the bright gold just as that very, very top highlight, just the same as I did with the steel really. In some areas, like on that design that's on the belt buckle, very much deliberately just painting it in the top half, almost like a half moon, and slightly smaller again, and it just gives enough variation between the different golds, especially with the oil washes that I'm going to come on to in a moment. And I'm using a ready mixed oil wash called Grease, and this is by Scale 75. You can mix your own oil washes. The reason I'm using an oil wash, and I'm sorry for those that hear this all the time, but there might be new viewers, the reason I'm using an oil wash is that you can take your oils back off again, and when they dry, they go into the recesses and weather your metal, make it look really, really nice and realistic. Shade it as well, but they don't pool on those flat surfaces, which means you don't need to go back and do a further highlight. So I'm using an old brush, painting the oil wash in, and you'll see the models are half based at the moment because I use the same oils on the bases as well, but it runs into all the recesses, and when it evaporates, most of it disappears, and the stuff that it doesn't disappear, you can go back with Artist White Spirit and just take it off the flat surfaces, because it takes more than 24 hours to fully dry and set, and you can just go back with a little bit of Clean White Spirit, take it where it's pulled slightly and just clean it away, which you can't do with a standard Citadel style wash. Here is Soulstone Blue Technical Paint, and I'm using it on the lenses. I actually painted little dots in with highlight layers using the brightest silvers, so that when I paint this over the top, it's more underpainting, so it looks like the lens effect that you can get if you layer it up with regular paints. Just a quick and easy way of doing it. Nice little black rim, and then it's one of each of the box apart from the characters done for this video. Thank you again to Games Workshop for sending this set to me. It's absolutely fantastic. I really can't wait to finish off the units and fill them out with the rest of the army, because it definitely appeals to my way of running the army rather than more elite troops. I absolutely love the peasant miniatures. They are really cool. I've got loads of ideas for using those miniatures for other things as well. I've already got my mind thinking about doing some kind of militia style unit for cell swords, maybe for my renegade crowns. I think they've got lots of potential, all the little extra bits as well to use and mix in with armies like that. So for renegade crowns, absolutely fantastic. But it's really nice to see that the Cathay range sort of full now, or at least a lot more like a regular army with real differences in troop types, and these peasants are probably up there with my favourite sculpts in the entire range, along with the actual cannon crew and the rocket crew, which I think are wonderful as well. Anything that looks a bit more sort of regular guy, I think. But these were loads of fun to paint. Hopefully you didn't mind the style of the video. I wanted to, rather than do individual painting tutorials for each one, that becomes a little bit boring. People don't want to watch the second or third video. I thought there'd be enough here for people to speed up or skip bits if they didn't want to, but still enough instruction there to give you an idea of maybe how to paint them. But some of the colours are very similar to what I did before for the previous Cathay video, at least for painting the weapons crews, the gun crews. So hopefully there's enough here and you've enjoyed it, and it's given you an idea of how you may be able to go about painting your own miniatures. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, found it useful, found it entertaining, something or other. If you're still here, probably one of those things. If you have, please do give it a like, drop a comment below. It genuinely really helps. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. There'll be lots more Warhammer the Old World content like this, and I plan on painting those astromancers that are in the set as well, so look out for that video very, very soon. If you like what I do and like to support me even further, please check out my Patreon. There's a link in the video description below. I couldn't do what I do without the support of my patrons, so thank you very, very much. Also check out the channel sponsor Counterattack Bases. Loads and loads of awesome custom dice and counters for Warhammer the Old World and many, many other games. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.